Okay, uh, let's go ahead and begin. I've got a recording on so that if anyone else wants to catch up later, we can do that. Uh, we could begin in a couple different perspectives, depending upon how deep and how quickly you want to go. My understanding is we're talking about a merger of cultures. Um, I've got a number of clarifying questions, but before I get into the clarifying questions, let me have you give a brief overview from your perspective and as you see it, and then I could ask clarifications because having been through a few of these before, there's a number of common problems that come up, and most of them get into interesting power dynamics when two organizations come together.
Okay.
So go ahead and give me a quick overview.
Okay. So first and foremost is this is not something which I was in there. This is a role which I had applied to, and then in interviewing people, in that organization, I found that this is the reason why they were looking at change, specialists and change leaders in the organization, because three small companies had merged and they had become one, and for whatever reason, the dominant leadership was from one organization. So, so there was a Hydro One, there is Hydro Mississauga, and there was one Hydro Brampton, whatever, ABC. So the A was mostly in the leadership, and for whatever reason, the new organization decided to use systems from this organization A and implement it to the entire organization because they were all using different systems, right? So that was one in terms of the system. Even in culture wise, there were differences between these three organizations, but I do not have a very deep understanding of what those cultural nuances were between them. But there was definitely this power play. There was definitely this, non-sharing, hoarding, and just non-collaboration because lots of these roles or the teams got mixed up because the maybe three people from A and then one from B and maybe two from C, where some of the roles from one particular company saw more job losses versus the others. So there was always this fear factor playing there as well. And then adoption of their newer system, saying that our system worked well and it was fine, and just because we got took over, now we have to adapt to this new system. So there was those kinds of friction between in the teams.
Okay, that sounds rather typical. Uh, when you do mergers, there's generally three levels that are involved.
Okay.
And most of the mergers, prior to actually executing the contracts and merging the companies legally, almost the entire focus is on the highest level, which is financially driven.
Okay.
They're looking at economies of scale between the two companies coming together. They're looking at common overhead that they can scale back. So you basically have a decision that is financially driven. And a lot of times that's about as far as they get until they actually put the companies together.
Okay.
They may do a little bit of business process comparison,
Okay.
but that's very detailed and very difficult to do until you actually put together a team on both parties together. So in some cases, there might be due diligence where the two partners will be bringing mid to lower level people together to talk about systems in advance so that when the, the actual merger takes place, they'll have some understanding as to what they're going to do with the business processes. But again, that's rarely done. The third level really gets into what you're now talking about is the culture itself, is that you're truly blending not only the financials, but the business operations, but the people and how they are used to working together. Um, was this designed to be, quote, a merger of equals or an acquisition of one company by another?
It was almost equals. It was just as you mentioned, maybe to economize on the,
Yeah.
scale and resources or any of the
Yep.
other
Yeah.
considerations.
A lot of times they'll call it a merger of equals, but that rarely, if ever, happens.
Okay.
Okay, because what ends up happening is that when you merge two organization charts together, there's redundancies.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and a lot of times, as part of the negotiation, some of the high level redundancies are actually negotiated with severance agreements. So that your executives are a lot of times, since you don't need duplicate executives, a lot of them will be given a nice bonus for retiring early at that point. What that does, though, is that creates a mix of top leaders from both merging organizations. And that's what starts the power struggle right there.
Okay.
Because they're coming in at a high level in the organization, thinking about their experiences and being ignorant about the new parts that are coming into their organization. So even if in advance they sometimes say, we will go with business processes or the values or the culture from company B. If the top person is from company A, that very quickly falls apart because the whole mentality comes from company A. And a lot of the decisions are made within the A framework, even though B might have better.
Okay.
And that creates problems immediately there. So your power struggle is almost inherent because the people are coming in positions of power to begin with, and they're basically being told to make it work.
Mm-hmm.
They're not being told how to make it work and how to get collaboration. So without being informed or coached on doing collaborative decision making, a lot of times they're going to keep acting the way they've always acted and make very quick decisions because when the merger comes together, there's immediate pressure to get the benefits that were expected from the merger. So a lot of decisions are made very rapidly. Rarely are they made collaboratively. You then run into an added problem in that your top management team is probably a mix of management from both companies.
Right.
So while you're trying to merge the business processes and culture throughout the company, there's also conflicts at the executive level itself
Okay.
that are struggling for power because they're trying to figure out, who do they have relationships with, where are the power balances, where are the alliances. So there's a lot of game playing at that level that then ripples down through the organization, that then creates, even within the organizations, an us versus them
That is right.
mentality based upon who's got the power in that part of the organization. You then have a further difficulty is that if you're merging business processes across the organization, you've got little pockets of us versus them scattered throughout the organization
Mm-hmm.
that in some cases are working together, in some cases working cross purposes
Mm-hmm.
together. So as a rule, it is very easy to get into a very messy situation with a lot of power imbalances.
Okay.
Okay. The question then comes is, at what point do they realize they've got a mess in their hands? Because at some point, if they don't take care of those conflicts, all of the benefits that they hope to realize aren't going to materialize. In fact, it's going to be even worse because you're going to have key people leaving. You're going to have maybe new people coming in without knowledge of either organization. You're going to have a mix of systems that are working across purposes, and you end up creating a lot of internal conflict where things just aren't working anymore.
Mhm.
And as people focus on the internal problems, they lose sight of their customers and they end up losing customers. So a lot of times you're talking about benefits expected from merging customer bases, but you know, one plus one is two. One plus one might be 1.2 or to 1.5 because of the problems that then ripple down to the customers themselves. And it's
So in this case, they had no issues with customers, right? Because of the
okay.
hydro company, right? Because so I don't think
Okay.
they are anyway concerned about their customer base. Maybe customer support, maybe tracking how they are faring in terms of responding to the needs of their customer. But actually losing customers, I don't think that was a problem with them at all. It
Okay.
was, and they I guess understood that this could be a problem, so they started building the change team early on. But in this case, I don't know whether the change leadership, like the change team leadership, came from which organization, and that might be something. Then how do they manage this power play if they did not come from the from the alignment of those leaders who are actually in position?
Okay. Let's talk about the actual transition and where you are in the transition. Normally, there is a cross organization team put together
Okay.
with key people from both organizations that sort through and make uh, probably first level is personnel decisions. What's the new organization chart going to look like? And then they will address or will create a second team that then looks at duplication of systems and figure out which system is going to uh, be the preferred system and then how to transition from one to the other. Okay.
Okay.
So where is the organization at timeline along that implementation path?
So they have already figured out which system they are going to use, which is
Okay.
going to be organization wide. So they have chosen from one of the organizations that we are going to implement their system.
Okay. In which case, the organization is now in place, though there's conflicting in the organization. People are still getting to know who's who.
Right, but I mean, all the change in the organization chart has already been done. So those who are here are
Right.
here. They have, in fact, uh, however that worked out. There were lots of contractual staff for one organization. Many of them got absorbed.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I am sure they have let go of some other positions of the same kind, but taken some out
Okay.
of the.
Yeah.
So however that worked out.
Contractors make it easy. Uh,
Mm, okay.
but again, at the same time, if they relied heavily on contractors, you could be losing some knowledge at the same time. Okay. Uh, the key then is a um, business process integration challenge.
Mhm.
Is that's what
Yeah.
you're facing right now?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, okay. In which case, you're probably dealing with resistance
Yes.
that can have its roots from of being forced to change, possibly being forced to change to something that they think is inferior,
Yes.
and from their perspective, it may be inferior because the decision was made at a more global perspective,
Correct.
and parts, you know, when you're merging two systems, some parts may be customized that customization may not be available in the newer system because of different priorities, different purposes.
Hmm.
Okay. Um, are they? Are you all co-located, or are we dealing with branch offices?
So yes, there are branch offices as well because it is all across,
Yep.
three regions actually, three municipalities
Right.
basically.
Okay. And
And the other challenge also in this mix is many of these people who have the knowledge are like 25, almost 30 years, or 15 years plus working within this company, and they are also unionized. Some of the uh, you know operators and other people, and
Okay.
also some of in the field. So that is also another complexity that is there in making.
Okay. Unionization is not universal across the merging companies then. In which case, one company had a unionized approach where the other one probably did not.
They all had, because there is some
Okay.
mandatory laws that some roles have to be unionized. So
Okay.
now I don't know which union they chose to go with, or they all three had the same union to start with. I am not sure of that,
Okay.
but that is another aspect of the
Yeah,
things that.
that's another aspect because you're now merging. You're not necessarily merging unions, but you're having the workers decide which union they want to go with, which may be different benefits there, different contractual obligations. There's also an added problem that's also frequently overlooked with unions, in that people who supervise union employees oftentimes get lazy
Okay.
and they let the contract manage the employee versus them managing the employee.
Okay.
Okay, so in a routine situation, a lot of times the supervisors only deal with problems, and all of the routine operations pretty much are handled by contractual negotiations that only happen every few years.
Mm-hmm.
In which case, they're now talking about having to merge and change operations, and those first level supervisors may not have the skills of management because they've gotten lazy managing union employees with a contract versus truly managing people
The work
themselves.
and the people.
Okay, so you may have a problem with your first level supervisors not being adequately trained in what would be good management
Okay.
processes. Uh, you
So they are also giving, maybe they have recognized that because they have started putting in place like leadership training programs, kind of,
okay?
not really leadership training program, but how to help managers become better supervisors, and
Okay,
give them how to become a better coach and things like that. So
okay,
I think what you're saying is right, that they recognize
okay,
that.
yeah, which is good, and it also is some indication that they're realizing that they've got some problems they need to get ahead of.
Okay.
Okay, so that's a positive approach. The the challenge is what are they teaching in a leadership or management course too. Okay, so for example, are they are you having an internal HR training doing it? Okay, um, are you knowledgeable about the curriculum of what they're focusing on in that training?
Mostly on how to have difficult conversation and how to become a good coach.
Okay, okay, um, okay, somewhat fundamental.
Yes, very fundamental.
Okay, in which case,
Because most of them are, so far I think the understanding is that all these, at least the supervisory roles, I'm not even going to say that a manager level role, the supervisory roles, they are just good workers, and they just, because of their experience and period of
okay,
tenure, they have come into positions of supervisors, but they are not exactly, so they want to turn them into manager capabilities, or leader capabilities, from just being a supervisor.
right, okay, and the challenge the challenge then will be the next level up also of expectations of that first level supervisor. So, for example, is the expectation going to be just to handle problems and don't bring them forward? Or is it going to be to have that first level supervisor become more aware globally about what the organization issues are?
So there is a mix of, yeah, injecting that information in them as well, saying that, why we did it and how we are doing it and how this is going to get better. And,
Yeah,
so there is a mix of injection of that as well.
yeah. In which case, that's necessary, but it also needs to be reinforced as to the expectations of those low level supervisors also. Okay, in which case, the middle managers can say that they are wanting the first line supervisors to be more strategic, more aware of what's going on in the organization. But unless they act on that and challenge their subordinates as to how they see the organization and the decisions they're making at a local versus a global perspective, a lot of that training will just become a local manager issue and not truly get the benefit that they're going to need. Okay. It sounds like they're at least got the foundation starting on moving in the right direction there.
Okay.
Because you've got branch offices, I'm assuming that they are from the geographic distribution of the original companies that merged together.
Yes.
Okay. In which case, your local supervision management is probably all from the original companies themselves,
Almost.
and the true merger of the organization chart are only at the corporate level. In which case, you now have effectively a decentralized organization of bringing together two organizations as if they were two divisions in the same company.
Two different business units like operating like. Yeah.
Right. Okay. In which case, then you've got your systems people or your business process people at the corporate level. They're coming in as outsiders. Okay. That brings up another case. Is the dominant organization the new headquarters location?
So yes and no.
Okay.
Because there is one which they had. I think one of the organizations had a like a core downtown area office space,
Okay.
and they have transformed that into their headquarters.
Okay. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But your IT people, your corporate planning people, your finance accounting people were all in the downtown location.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. In which case, your corporate headquarters then is a legacy organization from the dominant.
Yes.
And they are now trying to probably impose or sell their systems to the new divisions themselves, in which case they're probably seen as outsiders.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay. In which case of have they been building strong relationships with the top leader of each branch location?
They are trying, yes. It
Okay.
seems like that leadership has a good alignment. It is only these little functional pockets, little uh, little groups that are not 100% adopting the new system.
Okay. Okay. In which case, that raises a couple of interesting questions there. So, for example, if you've got a small pocket that's not adopting, how have they been able to continue to avoid? Or is it
Yeah, so maybe I'm wrong in saying not adopting, but there is a huge resistance.
okay?
So, there is still those murmurs and still the I think they're not feeling the productivity coming up in those areas. They're
Yeah,
like, oh, we are still struggling with the system. This is not right. This is not right. This is not working. So there's a whole lot of murmurs and,
yeah.
complaints and things coming up.
It's passive aggressive behavior. When forced, they will say that they're on board, but they don't follow through. There's negative talk among themselves. There's nobody speaking highly in favor of it.
Mm-hmm.
In which case, they're probably not getting the support they need from their top local management.
Okay.
Okay, in which case, top local management is probably dealing with other bigger issues, and they're leaving the IT to basically handle the problems below them. Okay. But the IT people are seen as corporate people, and there's no ramifications of not following through. So, for example, if the system fails, they may see that it's not their problem, but the corporate IT people's problem
Okay.
of picking the wrong system.
Right.
In
Okay.
which case, you're going to need more of a two things. One is a better liaison with your IT project team and the local top person and maybe the key people in the second tier at the local facility
Okay.
to meet on a face-to-face periodically and a video conference regularly to talk about where they are in the timeline, the problems that they're having.
Okay.
Okay. Because without that level of intense communication at the higher level, the low level people will not see their local management walking the talk.
Okay.
Okay. And that local management may not even be aware that they're about to miss timelines.
Okay.
And a key part of that meeting is where are we on the timeline? Where uh, where are our concerns and why do we have these concerns? And I'm assuming there is a timeline that's in place relative to complete turnover. I'm also assuming that there's probably a timeline for parallel processing.
So the parallel processes, they have already, in some areas it's on, but in some it's closed down. So like even in terms of, how they were billing, how they would accept the billing
Yep.
processes were different, right? So they are continuing with that process
Yeah,
still, trying because the customers have to be trained and however that works out for the finance as
yeah,
well. So that's still ongoing.
yeah. That's a critical period because you need to keep that parallel processing time ideally to a minimum because it's extra work because they're effectively doing double work in both systems. But it's also critical that you get past it and that you verify that the new system is working the same way as the expectation of the old system. It's also an opportunity to identify the benefits of the new system versus the old and place some additional focus on those benefits of the new system. And even if the benefit is not at the lower level, the benefit needs to be embedded in the stories that are told at the higher levels of the local facility.
I see.
Okay,
See. Okay.
because you're going to need continued pressure because if the parallel processing goes on too long, fatigue's going to settle in. People are going to become even more grumpy, um, and to the extent that there's issues identified in the new system versus the old system at the facility, those need to be identified on a log and reported and progress checked every day to every week. And that's got to be a critical component of the IT to local management conversations of here's the issues we're seeing and here's how we need to address those issues. And that needs to be really kept front and center because otherwise they're going to be remaining as a problem that will give the lower level people even more of an argument that the new system's not working. And it's not working because the issues aren't being addressed. And they may actually be at fault of not doing something right, but the corrective action is not being put in place.
Okay, because see, a couple of other things which in terms of the system has come up is that, sometimes, so initially they said, oh, this is not working. So, somebody would respond and say, hey, now this has been fixed, or, this is how is the workaround. And now they don't complain about that anymore, saying that, okay, nothing is, no more new problems are coming.
Okay.
But now what is happening is, or not as much, but now what is happening, if they try it one time and it doesn't work, they just come back and say, system is not working. So
Yeah.
how do we change that narrative, right? Like the system is working fine. We've done all the fixes and we've given you the, but they just don't try enough and they just don't want, immediately they will log a, complaint or a issue saying, oh, not working, system not working. And
Um,
then when we go and dig in, it's not the problem of the system.
Couple things come to mind. One is to probe further of what's not working or why do you think it's not working. And that gets back to something I've been working with Larry Lapp on, the 7 whys.
Right.
The 7 whys is a problem clarification process that when you run into a problem, it's probably a symptom, not the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you ask them why, for what reason is this problem occurring?
So how do you deal with this? Because these are all individuals coming out from random, it's not like a group and then you go and do this brainstorming of the fishbone analysis and you do the root cause and then all that, right? Here it's just we are randomly receiving these logs and saying not working. When we go and try to fix it, we find that all they had to do was just this, right? Like just kind of give it a little bit more time or whatever that looks like. So there is a log, but I more and more I feel that it is their way of resisting and creating as many
Yeah. Okay. The
logs
log
as
though, the
possible.
log is a first level why.
Okay.
Okay. And it needs to get deeper than that. And this is where you may be able to bring the lower level people that are making the log into the problem solving process. Okay.
Okay.
So says, okay, we got to, recognize that there is a problem. Okay. Let's talk about how, what's causing that problem. And this is where you get into multiple levels of why. So, for example, why or for what reason do you see this as a problem? Okay, and then you ask another why question as well. Why is that happening, or why are you expecting something different? And then they're going to give you something, another reason, and you ask, well, why is that happening? Generally, by the time you get down to 5 or 7 whys, you find the real problem at
Okay.
that point. But if you stop at levels 1 to 4, you're still dealing with the symptoms, you're not dealing with the real problem itself. And when you do that, you need to be careful not putting them on the defensive. And this is where the Spanish por qué is actually better than why. English only has one word for why. Spanish has two, and you want to use the why for what reason. And that's what you really want to get across this area. Why is this happening? I'm curious. And the person doing that can actually play ignorant.
Sure.
You can say, okay, we got a problem here. Let's see if we can solve it together. Why do you think this is happening? Now, you may have a good understanding of why it's happening, but by flipping that around, says, why do you think that's happening?
Sure.
Okay, you bring them into the solution itself at that point, and you also possibly get to what may be a misunderstanding of how the system is supposed to work. And this is where the log only is a first level why. It's not deep enough to really get down to the core problem itself. And sometimes if you go through enough of why, they may come to realization themselves and the problem cures itself at that point. Okay. And it's also another added benefit in that you're making them as part of the change team to solve the problems, because if all you do is log the problem, their responsibility is done. If they log a problem, it's now IT's problem. It's not their problem anymore. Where if you bring them into the problem solution itself, then they become part of the team working together. So it's an attitude difference of IT coming in to solve the problems versus IT coming in to help solve problems together.
So how do you deal with that on an ongoing basis? Like, does it have to be a program that is going to get deployed, or how do we how does one work
Right.
at the solution at a level that it can reach?
Okay. Given that you're in parallel testing right now, everybody on the everybody on the IT team right now should be doing exactly this.
Okay.
Okay.
So they have to be all
System's
given one narrative.
yeah, the system's basically implemented, and now they're responsible for getting it to work. And this is where a lot of IT people think that once it's implemented, their job's done. No, once it's implemented, their job is just beginning. It's not until it's fully accepted and adopted is the job done. So this becomes maybe an IT management expectation of the team. The implementation is really a checkpoint along a much longer road.
Okay.
Okay, because right now I'd say that you're at a very critical, dangerous position, and everybody needs to be focused on parallel testing and getting the log down to nothing. Okay, then when you talk about longer term, that almost becomes an expectation of your IT people themselves. What is their job? Is their job to program a system, or is their job to implement a system that works? It seems like a fine line, but it's very, very big difference.
And I don't think they think that way. That's the other thing.
Yeah, a lot of organizations don't think that way. They think of once a system is coded and put in place, they're done. No. They're just starting. And that's actually one of the benefits of the agile development. Because agile development brings the end user into the process much earlier as a team effort. And they're doing it in small incremental pieces because they can't move on to the next piece until that first piece is implemented. So the agile development actually builds that into the methodology, where a lot of standard systems project methodology does not have that user involvement level. Okay, so right now you're having to kind of patch things together and then later build a foundation going forward of that approach. Now, let me ask you another question too. Are we dealing with primarily one system, or is there multiple pockets of different types of systems that are being implemented?
Predominantly one system, because they've taken,
Okay.
I think, from the larger customer base. So the company which has a larger customer base, they've taken that system.
Okay.
Like that system was also more current than the others.
Okay.
So, they implemented a newer system.
Yeah. The only reason I ask is that a lot of times when you do a company merger, you would benefit from having communities of practice that bring people across the organization doing the similar job together to talk about the differences of how they do their job at different places. Okay, so, but again, that is much broader than one group of systems people. So for example, you may have maintenance people, you may have project managers, you may have HR people, you may have local planners, you may have local purchasing people. Each of those could form a separate communities of practice to basically share ideas across the organization, but it also builds a collaborative approach across the organization because they're working together, they're learning who their counterparts are, in different parts of the organization, and they're establishing relationships with others that if they have a problem, they know who to call. So it may not necessarily be knowledge sharing in the current, but you're establishing relationships that will have knowledge sharing capabilities later. But that sounds like it's probably a separate issue than you're dealing with right now.
Yeah. But this is good to know that also some learnings, right, from what have not worked and what could
Yep,
have
that's
been
right.
done.
Yeah,
So yeah, and then going forward, if there is any other kinds
yeah,
of changes,
yeah.
maybe
Because
implementing this.
yeah, you have a danger of having silos between each location because of really twofold. First, they're separate location, which automatically encourages silos. And
Mhm.
secondly, they come from different corporations before the merger, which really doubles the silo mentality. A communities of practice helps to break that almost as a matrix organization, but you don't formalize the matrix. The matrix itself is really the communities of practice with knowledge sharing. Okay, so there's some benefit of breaking silos as well as knowledge management benefits from communities of practice, but that requires a little bit of structure and encouragement, probably from the HR side. And again, the focus isn't to necessarily share knowledge, but to share issues, concerns, and share best practices.
Okay. The other, I mean, it's not something that we can deal with, but there is definitely a lot of uh, not hearing the same things from the leadership.
Yeah, yeah. There's probably multiple things that as you go forward over the next couple of years, you're going to see as differences between the two companies. And communities of practice might help surface them before they become a conflict.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to a little bit more dig deeper into how to the actual framework of how it works the best and how we can implement that community.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay. Any other questions for today?
no, I think I got some good ideas in terms of what I am looking at. Also, I mean, because I'm down here, I am not able to look at it from here, right? I only hear that from what has been communicated through the organizational communication channels.
Okay.
But
What is your role right now?
so I'm like a consultant with
Okay.
them, like I am a contractual person with them.
Okay. You're an outside consultant, hired by who?
So I am actually hired by the L&D team,
By which team?
the learning and development team,
Okay. Okay. Which is part of HR
which is
uh,
part of HR.
at the corporate level.
Yeah, so
Okay.
it sits with the change and organizational development. They all sit together, but it
Okay.
is part of the HR function. Yeah.
Okay. So your opportunity then is to use your personal power and your connections to work with HR
Okay.
to help them see the problems. Okay. Now, again, this raises another question: is HR a traditional HR, or are they more strategic thinking HR?
More traditional.
Okay. Okay. In which case, the HR generalists are fighting fires, and the HR specialists are basically doing within their specialization areas, basically as requested. And the HR manager is probably the only one that is looking at the problems as you're seeing.
Perhaps, and they also, because it's under one function, so I think not so much in terms of the problem, they are looking at the change leaders to, help them ta- make this go away.
Okay.
But
The
yeah,
okay
but then
your change team right now is a merger change team.
yes.
Okay.
So the change director is from the main organization, and then the change manager is, yeah, she brought her in from her past life, and then there are two specialists who are, one was, I think, in a different role and she moved in, and one they took from outside.
Okay. Is the change team heavily dominated uh, by what functional area? What functional area is dominated in the change team?
So there is one who specializes in communications.
Okay.
There is one who had a different HR role, and the director was always, she had an organizational development role.
Okay. 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 Um,
And the one which they just took from outside, more like a generalist, change
okay. Um,
specialist. Yeah.
not a bad mix on the surface. Um, have you identified who you can leverage through your connections to relate your ideas to them to see if they're seeing the same issues as you are?
So, because I am a contracted person, I have a very specified role of what I mean,
Okay.
I can talk to my manager, but then again, it's always the question of, you've not been here for too long, so, what has gone on before, maybe they've done something more. It's just for me as an outsider, I'm looking at it. So, I have mentioned a few things to my manager, but, I mean, they said that they are working, they're aware and they are working at things. Uh,
Okay. Um,
yeah.
the person who contracted you is head of training and development or learning and development.
Yeah, yeah. So
Okay.
manager of learning and development.
Okay. Um, is that person focused on doing what he or she is asked to do, or is that person more focused on investigating what the organization needs and trying to involve others in that direction?
So far, what I have seen, again, I have not been for too long. I'm on a short-term contract, but what I've seen is that she's got her plates full because of, this difference in managing the learning management system itself, because some of it also compliance driven, lots of their and
Right.
then with the COVID happening, lots of other stuff has hit them because they had to put in more training in place for various other reasons. So all that put together, I don't think she's had the time to surface up and look at it from 10,000 feet above and say, hey,
Yeah.
and then of course the merger did not happen too far back, so it's all like a.
Yep. That's one of the problems in that when you have a lot of regulatory compliance, that becomes mandated, and the things that should be done aren't done because the have to do things are done.
Yes.
Uh, okay,
Yes, and
so
L&D is like, because the compliance part is, so we are always judged by the compliance pieces first before looking at, and then any leadership or any other change, then the change kind of gives us a
yeah,
direction or, prepares it and gives it to us.
okay, so your primary challenge then is to get her ear,
Okay.
and that may be like a series of questions of, I'm seeing this. Why do you think this is happening? Maybe even like use the seven whys of, because the person probably is not seeing what you're seeing, primarily because she's fighting fires,
Mhm.
and you need to basically assess, I'm seeing this as an observation. Are you seeing it, or are you hearing others seeing it? So basically validate your ideas through questioning,
Okay.
thereby uh, raising an awareness of the issue. Because if she's not aware of the issue, she becomes a roadblock to the head of HR, which really probably needs to get a few things moving.
Okay.
Okay. Um,
That's good.
looks like. Give me a second here.
Dr. Ross, I just observed that telephone behind you. That is awesome.
Oh,
Oh, wow.
my father worked for the telephone company for years, and he collected telephones. So I've got that's just one. I've got some other older phones on the
Wow.
cadenza behind me. Let's see. I can look at one thing real quick. I can't find it. Let me make a note to myself. Um, okay. Um, the challenge you have with your direct report, who's head of the learning development group, is having that person become aware of the broader issue. And I think I've got a few things that I could send you that direction as to raise an awareness.
Okay.
Okay, and it gets back to stages of change. Okay, and that the first level of change is being aware of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Second level is having a decision to solve the problem. Third level is actually preparing to solve the problem. Fourth level is actually doing it.
Doing it.
Fifth level is maintenance. So in your IT system, they're in the middle of 4 right now. They're putting the system in place, but they haven't yet moved to maintenance. Okay, in which case, if you stop at level 4, you're not going to be successful because you don't have it maintained. There's going to be backsliding problems. So on the system side, the key is to move from level 4 into level 5, but you have a different level with your direct report because that person's probably at level 1 not knowing what the issues are, and secondly may not be aware of the need to address those issues. So you're basically doing a stakeholder analysis of different levels, different communication with the different stakeholders, and your direct report being a different stakeholder than the IT people and the people that are using the system. Okay. Anything else for today? Any questions?
I think this is a lot of things that you've said. I've noted it down. I want to do my own little reading and stuff so that I can get a more broader understanding and what's out there if I can find.
Okay.
That is a good direction.
Okay. Let me know if anything else comes up. We could do another session as you refine. Maybe give it a week or two to see how things go.
Okay, it might take a little bit more because, as I said, my work is something else, and this is something I am looking at a little ahead. So I will definitely let you know how these things are being addressed right now. Because another thing which there's another new system is probably coming in terms of at least our area, which is the learning management system. So we've already adopted one and trying, and then they're already in conversation of upgrading and bringing another system.
Yeah, and the LMS is probably more tied to compliance regulation, isn't it?
So it is both. As it stands today, it sits outside of absolute compliance for this organization, but yes, that's the idea, that everything can be all together.
Right, because the regulatory
and talking to the HR system as well, right?
Right, because you have to do reporting for regulatory compliance.
Yes.
And then as long as you're doing the system, you could throw your other non-regulatory training into the same system. And that becomes an HR personnel record issue.
It still sits with L&D and not with HR, so it's a bit of
it may not be directly associated with HR, but it becomes part of the personnel record as who's had what training. And if you get into succession planning or leadership development, it'll tie into that.
As of now, they are not doing that.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. As of now, it is just for compliance and assigning and maintaining and creating trainings and things like that.
Okay. Well, the foundation will allow you to do more than just that.
Yeah. Not the older system, but the newer ones will. Yeah.
Okay. Very
Thank you
good.
so much. Have a lovely afternoon. It was
Okay.
very nice chatting
All
with
right.
you.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
You too. Take care.